Welcome to IFERP, a forum where innovations and research interest could be supported and developed, prioritizing our mutual interest. In this video, we want you to dive into our world, giving yourself a clear insight into IFERP. But first, who are we and what do we do? Institute for Engineering Research and Publication, IFERP for short, is one of the world's largest non-profitable professional associations operating under the Techno-Elite Research and Development Association, TRADA, meant for research and development in the field of engineering, science and technology. We are one of the largest professional bodies for engineering professionals in India and across the globe, established in 2014. We extend to every part of the globe, with more than 28,000 professional members and 34,000 student members. Our growing membership at IFERP has led to an increase in members from Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa and the USA, fostering networking opportunities that strengthen ties within and across countries and technical communities. The mission of IFERP is to connect professionals at an integrated platform for growth to divert knowledge and skills towards the sustainable application of professional education and more. And our vision of digitalizing innovation processes through our professional networking services and more has pushed us forward to our achievements today. With our mission to make our academic services reach the top and grassroots level of institutions, we are funding colleges to organize conferences and scientific events, enabling researchers incubated at different areas of our country to directly contribute towards the transformation of India. IFERP simply connects engineers, exchange global innovation, and acts as a bridge between researchers and academics by organizing international conferences, world conferences, faculty development programs, webinars, seminars, providing membership, and more. Some of our conferences include WCASET Malaysia, WCASET Jakarta, ICAS ETAM APU Malaysia, and many more. We've also organised scientific events in association with renowned universities done in the past, with over 28,593 journal publication services, creating opportunities to get your research paper published in high impact factor journals such as Scopus Indexed, Web of Science, Google Scholar Index journals, ESCI, UGC approved, L Compandax, ISI, Shimago Index journals, and many more. To make our operations smoother and more perfect, we have been supported by our associated organisation, Association of Cloud Technologists, Global Association of Nanotechnology, International Association for Big Data Analysts, International Association for IoT, International Wireless Network Association, and World Association for Structural Engineers. We have also worked alongside several clients and partners both nationally and internationally like University Malaysia Sabah, APU Malaysia, UNJ Jakarta, MC University Thailand, Ajman University Dubai, PUP Philippines, IIUM Malaysia, ISU Philippines, FCPC Philippines, WCC Philippines SRM University, Galgotia University, Amity University, and much more government and private organisations in different countries. At IFERP, we believe that there's always a better way to treat professionals, and that is what we do. If you would like to see more or go deeper on IFERP, you can visit our website at www.iferp.in.
Hello. Hello? Hello?
Good morning.
Yeah, morning. Should we start
Yes,
now?
yes. Welcome all to our webinar on nanostructured metals and alloys. And this is Dr. Atindra Shukla, our keynote speaker of the day. He is currently director and associate professor at Shah Shulkum Center for Surface Science and Nanotechnology, which is affiliated to Dar Senham Desai University, India. And after his doctorate in chemistry, he has done 2 postdoctoral research assignments in Weizmann Institute of Science, Israel, and University of Miami from USA. And later he joined CSMRI Bhavnagar in 2007 as a scientist and later moved to SSCSCN DDU as an associate professor. To his credit, he has several research paper publications and 3 patents, and he is also an awardee of Association of Pharmacy Professionals as a Young Scientist Award in the year 2007, 17, and he's also an active society of. So thank you so much. So without hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, it is getting interrupted little bit.
Okay, so you can share your screen and we can begin.
Okay. Hello. Good morning to all. Uh, Good morning and happy Vijayadashmi to all. Shall we start on the current topic? Yeah. I am Dr. Atindra Shukla, delivering a webinar on recent developments in nanostructured metals and alloys, which is being organized by IFERP. And I'm very thankful to them for hosting this one for me. And shall we start on the topic today? Uh, So just before going into topic, I would like to just give a brief introduction about my organization, which is a Shah Sulman Center for Surface Science and Nanotechnology. It was established in 2008 from the grant of Government of Gujarat, and it was affiliated to Dharamsi Desai University. It was an early experiment of PPP model, which is at that time CM was planning to promote in the state, and now he's doing same with the nation. So this was kind of a combined effort from government of Gujarat, and then it was affiliated to university, and we catered to 10 leading industries in their field for a kind of corpus funds for R&D activities. We have about 25 companies supporting our program in form of a kind of founding members, as well as the members who are giving grants for research projects, or who are actively working with us on development of their product through analytical services or our consultancy services. We have an advanced instrumentation facility at our center, which is housing very sophisticated instruments for nanotechnology and surface science analysis. Some of them are listed here. X-ray diffraction, you can see atomic force microscope is there. This is the list. If one wants to see, they can get to our website, which is in my signature in the beginning of the slide. And our core expertises are on self-assembled monolayers, polymer nanocomposites. In many cases, these polymer nanocomposites consist of metal or metal oxide nanoparticles, metal and semiconductor nanoparticles for catalysis and optical applications, catalyst synthesis and catalysis, polymeric nanoparticles for drug delivery mainly, and some other applications I mean, it's like in a nano suspensions and all. Surfactants, foaming agents, these are also additives for various applications, including stabilizing the nano particles. Emulsions and microemulsions, wettability and penetration, smart drug delivery systems, and carbon nanomaterials. So this was a small detour towards our center's activity. Now we go to the main course, that is the recent developments in nanostructure metals and alloys. So what I am planning to do is I will start from the basics. What are the nanomaterials, or what is nanotechnology, and then we'll slowly move to nanostructured metals and alloys. So we know that what is I mean, today there is a boom on nanotechnology. A lot of people are talking. So what is it? It is the study of controlling or analyzing of matter or material and an atomic or molecular scale. Generally, nanotechnology deals with structure size between 1 to 100 nanometer. Larger than 100 nanometer structures are normally, even though they have a dimension of nanometer size, but they can be in the boundary between nanomaterials and micron size materials. So normally between 1 to 100 nanometer size materials are falling into nanotechnology or nanomaterials. The classical definition of nanotechnology is the understanding and control of matter at dimension of roughly 1 to 100 nanometers, where unique phenomena which will enable novel applications, because size will be so small that the material, or maybe metal or metal oxide or even carbon nanomaterials, will start showing some unique optical, electrical, thermal, all those type of, or even mechanical properties, and those can be exploited, or those can be utilized for various applications, various functions we want to carry out. So that is one of the main driving force behind the so much popularity of nanotechnology. Japanese scientist Norio Taniguchi used this word nanotechnology first time in 1974. But early inspiration for this work or research started in a good, significant amount when Professor Feynman, when famously said in one of his lecture that there is plenty of room at the bottom. So, and then he raised several questions which we'll see, and those questions or answers, seeking answers to those questions lead to a very humongous R&D on nanotechnology. However, we must understand that this is research, means we are again searching something. It was existing since many years. Nanomaterials are existing since maybe 2000 or 3000 years ago, but they were not fully characterized, they were not fully understood in those days, but still they were applied, or they were used for certain kind of applications. And so some of the examples are very well known of that. We have heard about silver nanoparticles, keeping water in copper or silver will disinfect it and purify it. It will be beneficial to health. It is our traditional ancient Indian this one. And there ancient Chinese, ancient Egyptians, and other civilizations were also knowing the use of certain nanoparticles, particularly silver and gold. So it is it was very well known. But after Professor Feynman's prophetic statement, it became kind of a very well sought field in research and development to work upon. And then slowly research started moving around in this area. After the Japanese scientists used the word nanotechnology, then a kind of a significant efforts were made in the area of nanotechnology. What we mean by nano is we know all 1 nanometer is equal to 10 to the power minus 9 meter. So it is the length scale basically. a very tiny length scale. In the Greek word for dwarf or a short people or short person is called nano. So from there, this word has come, nanotechnology or nano, and we can see the size perspective from 1 meter onwards to kind of 1 angstrom in the scale, and we can see that what are the examples of those size scale available. And there are, I mean, human hair is what we have seen. It is somewhere between 60 to 120 or 150 micron meter or micron wide, and when compared to nano materials, it will be very large to nano wires, or so those examples will be shown. But here there are some of the man-made nanomaterials are shown. One of the example is a carbon nanotube or buckyball or fullerene type of thing. Some people have created DNA self-assembly on certain substrates, which are also a use of natural nanomaterial onto creating something. Then MEMS are there, or we have the quantum dots are there. So these nanomaterials are used in various applications, which we'll see now. This is what I was talking about, that compared to human hair, the how small are nanowires. So what we are seeing is our nanofibers or nanowires, and the brown one is human hair. This is a scanning electron microscopy image of hair and nanowires, and you can see hair is way too wide compared to the nanowires. So this is the scale we are dealing with. And what was the role of Feynman? He made a presentation in Caltech, in American Physical Society convention, in 1959, and he made a statement called "there is plenty of room at the bottom." What he was indicating at that, there is we need to go deeper, and we need to go to the molecular or even atomic level of the matter to get a better control. So his questions were like, why can't we manipulate materials atom by atom? Why can't we control the synthesis of individual molecules? So when molecules are being synthesized atom by atom, if we can manipulate the materials atom by atom, then we can synthesize molecules of our choice or our desire with very excellent control. Why can't we write all of human knowledge on the head of a pin, which is slowly now happening? Like we have a miniaturization in the information or the data storage devices, and virtually we can write a very vast form of knowledge or information on a very tiny device. Like small pen drives or chips can contain terabytes of information. So those things are slowly happening, but this was envisaged by him almost 60 years ago. So that is the beauty of a visionary scientist. Like he saw these things 60 years ago that this should happen, and we are seeing these things happening with our eyes. Why can't we build machines to accomplish these things? So because remember, he was talking in this about in 1959. So we did not have too much tools to do all those things. Now we have instrumentation for characterizing nanomaterials, as well as the instrumentation to create nano devices, nano circuits, MEMS, all those things. So slowly this has developed, but in those years these were the great challenges, and great challenges normally encourages scientific community to do a kind of go an extra mile and do some excellent research. In year 2000, the National Science Foundation of Government of USA, they formed a committee called National Science and Technology Council. They gave one statement that nanoscience will change the nature of almost every human-made object in the next century, and that is actually we are seeing happening. and this was again 20 years back. And you see in 20 years they are being proved almost correct, and many things are being influenced by nanotechnology. So what is the big deal about something so small? As we know that size matters, like when you alter the size, particularly here is the example from one company called Evident Technologies. It has made quantum dots, it marketed as Evidot quantum dots. This was about around 12-15 years back. What they have made, like quantum dots of size between 3.2 to 5 nanometer, and as size increases, the emission of these quantum dots is changing the color or whatever. So blue, the smallest size quantum dot is giving blue emission, while we go for 5 nanometer size, it is giving red emission. So you see the size dependent optical properties of nanomaterials, and it can be exploited for very many things. Basically, quantum dot based display devices are already coming into market. Some of the thin wall mounted TVs are going to come on quantum dot based technologies. There are many other imaging devices are coming on quantum dot based technologies. So these are the advantages of miniaturization or reduction in size, from going millimeter or micrometer to the nanometer. Yeah. So now we are going into some general applications of nanotechnology in various areas. It covers very many areas. Biotechnology, transportation, means it covers fuel and the wear, friction, tribology type issues with the transportation, and even packaging also. Then national security and defense, it is one of the very important field where nanotechnology, many of you might have heard about stealth technology and Tejas aircraft using the carbon composite on its body. So all those things are nanocarbon composites were created by IISc, and then they are used in some of the devices or the aircrafts and other things which our forces are going to use. So national security and defense, food and agriculture, medicine is also one of the field where nanotechnology is being widely used, and always we have seen that medicine is a field where high cost or expensive research is being done. Like because we know that human nature is to save life, spending a large chunk of money. We don't see when our relative is ill or sick and needing some medical help, we go out of the way to do the expenditure behind him or her. And that is why medicine field is very lucrative for nanotechnology, because nanotechnology is still a developing field. The costs are very high of using developing nanomaterials and using them. So medicine justifies those expensive techniques. Aerospace engineering, aerospace, then energy and environment, it is also becoming very popular field, because we are needing energy, more and more energy as human population is growing, demand is growing. Advanced materials and textiles, we have seen that textiles are coming now. People are claiming that virus resistant textiles will come into market, certain advanced materials to protect ourselves from certain types of invasions or microorganism attacks and all. So those things fall into advanced materials and textiles, or even coatings. Information technology is also one of the field where nanotechnology is extensively contributing. Similarly, mechanical engineering, robotics, where everywhere nanotechnology is one of the very important field. Now we go to very basic, that what is metal, because we are talking about nanostructured metal. So we should be knowing that metal has certain unique properties. One of them is malleability, ductility, thermal and electrical conductivity. And why they are conductive is shown here with the electronic energy level diagram, that they have matter has two bands, two electronic bands or electronic arrangements, such a way that in material that they form two clusters or two band in a matter. One is conduction band and another is valence band. When they are overlapping on each other, a material is called conductor in terms of thermal and electrical conductivity, particularly electrical, and they are normally metal. And when it is called semiconductor, there is a band gap, a discrete band gap, but that band gap can be crossed up, or it can be bridged, and it is bridged by various techniques, doping and other type of things. But those materials are called semiconductor, and in terms of metallurgy they are semi-metal. And then there is another material called insulator, where this conduction band and valence band are far apart, and there is a significant energy difference between these two, which is denoted by delta E here. And they are called non-metal, and you require very high energy for an electron from valence band to cross over to the conduction band, and that is why they are not very good in electrical conductivity, and that therefore they are very good insulators. So this is a kind of the conductor semiconductor insulator terminology is related to metal, semi-metal and non-metal terminology. Another property of metal is it has to be flexible. Flexible it doesn't mean like a polymer or something, but it should be non-brittle. It can be bent with a mechanical force, and it stays there. Then it can be reshaped back, but it requires energy in both the cases. But that is possible. So metal can be bent to create a kind of angles and all those things which we have seen. So now we go, this was a talk about pure metal. When you have some additive with a pure metal, say suppose iron, we are adding something, then it becomes an alloy. So alloy is normally a combination of more than one metals, or sometimes one of the component is the non-metal also. So if you add carbon to iron, it becomes mild steel. If you add say chromium to iron, it becomes stainless steel. So those two are examples of alloy. In one case the one of the component is non-metal, and in another case the additive is metal, chromium. So this is how this definition or understanding of alloy is there. And in general terms, it is also a kind of a hybrid material, because since it is a combination of two types of material, many times two different types of metal, or many times a combination of metal and non-metal. And also it can be called a composite material, because normally composites are also a kind of hybrid material, and it is formed by a combination of two or more components. These alloys essentially exhibit metal type characteristic. However, it depends on the what is the composition of a metal and non-metal part, or metal and the semi-metal part. But still, these alloys exhibit metal type characteristic, and some of the examples are steel. Brass is one of the widely used alloy. Nickel and chromium. Magnesium is magnesium plus aluminium. It is one of the very, in terms of mechanical strength, it is one of the very strong alloy, and it is being used for aircrafts construction. Nowadays, certain electronic gadgets are also coming, particularly digital SLRs and tablets, and laptop chassis are made from magnesium. Jewelry grade gold is always actually an alloy, because it is a combination of copper and gold. So a certain amount of copper is added into gold, and in classical terms it is called adding impurity of copper into gold, and that is why people tell that pure gold is never is not good for forming a jewelry or shaping jewelry, but impure one means it is containing certain percentage of copper, and all of you know that it is measured by carat and all those, it's a purity scale. But we can always find out the composition in percentage of how much percentage copper is there, how much percentage gold is there. Accordingly, it's certain mechanical properties, particularly the bending, flexibility, its sign, it's all those things are changing a little bit. Nitinol is a shape memory alloy. It is called shape memory alloy. When you bend it and wind it again, so it is a kind of alloy of nickel and titanium. Electrum is a naturally occurring alloy. It is naturally found from the mines. It is silver and gold alloy, and it is found in gold mines where silver is a kind of impurity, or in a smaller, it is a smaller component of the overall alloy. Solder, we have seen that soldering process of the electronic or electric device circuitry, that solder is also a kind of alloy. It is tin and lead based metal. Then there are other soldering materials also. So these are the common examples of what are the alloys. Now we are moving into metal nanoparticles. Now we have to remember that when we talk about metal nanoparticles and nanostructures in general, we are not at present talking about alloys, but alloys and metals more or less behave similarly. So the process of making nanomaterials from metal or alloy is similar. However, there are very less examples or less frequency of making nanoparticles out of alloy compared to pure metals, and there are certain reasons which we will talk in on the course while talking about these things. But as per periodic table, the noble metals form nanoparticles with zero valent metal center due to their excellent chemical stability. This contains that group number 7 to 11 or 7 to 12 group, and period number 5 and 6 mainly, and one of the candidate from 4 also, that is copper. So there is there is a dilemma or a kind of discrepancies among chemists defining the what are the actually noble metals. Only pink shown here are agreed by all as a noble metal. Then so some others are the other 4 elements or other the metals are not agreed by all, but some claim them to be also part of noble metals. So these can exist as a zero valent metal, and when they can exist as zero valent metal very easily without getting oxidized, and they can form a nanoparticle, because when you form nanoparticle, you are increasing its surface area by many folds, and so it will have a very high surface activity, and it will have chance to get oxidized very quickly compared to the bulk metal. Even though in bulk also they get oxidized at surfaces. So stable nano metal or nanoparticles of metal is not a very easy thing to achieve, particularly considering the chemical oxidation as one of the vulnerability to vulnerability of metal towards chemical oxidation. So basically, easily reducible metals give stable nanoparticles such as gold, silver, platinum, palladium. They can be reduced, or even copper also in some cases. They can be reduced by chemical reducing agents. As the small schematic equation is shown, that metal with n valency, it can be 2, 3, 4, or even 1, can be reduced to metal 0 by electrochemical or chemical reduction. And in most common I forgot the bottom-up approaches, starting from metal salt-based precursors. So normally metal are in their ionic form in form of salt, mostly chlorides or whatever. And when you reduce it, it goes to metal zero valent, and then it exists as a metallic form nanoparticles, and they can be then collected. And another approach is top down approach, means when you start with a very bulk or large piece of metal, and then you apply high energy ball milling or other techniques such as laser ablation and all, they will create nanoparticles out of metal sheet or metal block or rod, and then those can be collected, and they can also be a kind of, that is top down approach, means when you start from bulk to nano. And in bottom up approach, you start from ions or even at a molecular or atomic level, and you create nanoparticles. So, there are certain examples. Normally at lab scale, bottom up approaches are widely used. So what are the reducing agents or common reducing agents being used? Here a very large amount of research is going on of choice of reducing agents, and people have started with many reducing agents. Most of them are basically a benign reducing agents, not very harsh ones, but like say trisodium citrate or sodium ascorbate. In some cases they have used flavones from plants. These flavones are excellent antioxidants. Some of the cases they have used anthocyanin or anthocyanidin based pigments. Alkaloids from plants are also used for reducing the metal, and polyols also. The polyols are containing a large number of hydroxyl groups. So these antioxidants or a kind of reducing agents reduce the metal from its native oxidation state to zero valent state, and then the another problem arises that we will talk later. But the common precursors for these metals are their chloride or nitrate salts, because they are very highly soluble in aqueous system, and most of the cases aqueous system is better in terms of environmental concern and other things, that it is easily like environmentally it is much more friendly. So people use aqueous solution of metal salts mostly, and then use soluble reducing agents, and then they reduce it, and in situ or in solution itself metal nanoparticle suspensions are created. Visibly we may not see them, but we may see them by change of color, because many of the metal nanoparticle has a discrete or a spatial peculiar optical signature, optical property. Those they will exhibit. Like suppose we are starting with silver nitrate and create a silver nanoparticles out of it, they will show from a kind of colorless solution to faint orangish yellow or golden yellow color solution, that is around 417 nanometer. It is absorbing the light in a visible region, and that is actually kind of one of the determination of presence of silver nanoparticles there. So that way we can create a suspension of nanoparticles, and if you want to get them separated out, then we have to do certain types of unit operations. Filtering is not going to work, because most of the filter materials are going to have sieve size larger than the particle size, so you will end up with nothing on the surface of the filtration unit. But in most of the cases centrifugation is used. Very high speeds, high G power centrifugation is used, and then nanoparticles are separated on the bottom of the centrifuge tubes, and then it is separated and washed, and all those things can be done. So dry nano powder, if you want, that is also achieved, and most of the cases many of the applications are done in a suspension form only. So this is one of the example. You can see the schematic drawing here. At the same time we discuss about some of the aspect of forming metal nanostructures. One of the concern is oxidative stability, as we discussed in past, that metal nanoparticles are highly reactive, or they may react towards, even though they are relatively from inert metals such as silver or copper, they may form their oxides very quickly. Particularly in case of aqueous solution, there will be dissolved oxygen, so they will take that dissolved oxygen and get converted to corresponding oxide. And since it is in nano, major part will be on surface, so their surface gets converted to oxide. A whole nanoparticle will become a kind of oxide, and then after forming oxide, it doesn't remain metal nanoparticle, it is metal oxide nanoparticle. So there is a difference, and many times people do not differentiate between metal nanoparticle and metal oxide nanoparticle. Many times people are working with iron nanoparticles, they are actually iron oxide nanoparticles, not iron nanoparticles. So because iron as a nanoform, it is not highly stable against oxidation, it gets converted to oxide very quickly. So to prevent that, what should be done? So what they are doing is they use certain type of capping agent, so that capping agent will cover the surface of nanomaterial or nanoparticle such a way that it will insulate practically that surface from getting oxidized. So dissolved oxygen or atmospheric oxygen cannot come into contact of the surface, and so that it will prevent it getting oxidized. At the same time, it gives another benefit, kind of thing, that it gives a double benefit. Another benefit is it provides the protective layer against aggregation also, because these nanoparticles have a very strong aggregating forces, so they tend to aggregate very quickly. They tend to come close together, they aggregate, and then with Ostwald ripening, they slowly form a kind of micron size nanoparticle. And that so Ostwald ripening gives you back some kind of your experiment will slowly fail, because you will end up getting micron size nanoparticles. So to prevent that, people use capping agents, and those capping agents are normally polymers, inert polymers mostly, like PVP and PEG, in some cases polyethylene glycols and thiols, particularly these gold group members metals, like gold group metals such as platinum, gold, silver, and then this palladium, they tend to bind with thiol group, SH group, and those thiols also can cover the surface very nicely and prevent the oxidation as well as aggregation. There are certain surfactants are used, which are surface active molecules. They form a layer on the metal nanoparticles and prevent the aggregation. In some cases, dendrimers have been used, polymer matrices has been used, certain ligands have been used. That their ligands are known to bind metal strongly, but their metal binding properties have been exploited to use them as a kind of protecting layers. And these aggregates or clusters of metal gradually form large particles. So there's to prevent that, this thing is done. Here in picture you can see the green ring, that is capping agent, and when they are capped, they are little far apart, and in those conditions you have to use instrumentation techniques to characterize them. And if you have a bare nanoparticle and capped nanoparticle, there will be size difference based on the layer thickness of the capping agent. So those things can be then studied. Layer thickness we can change, and then many times certain properties are also changing, which we'll see in later one of the example. So what are the possible nanostructures? Because we have talked mainly about nanoparticles, but yes, there will be, we think about only spherical particles as nanoparticles, but there could be different shapes also, like nano rods, nano wires, nano crystals. One of the unique is the nano mesh. Actually, it is from bulk, there is a mesh is created, a kind of sieve type nano mesh is created. Then core shell nanoparticles, they similar to those capped nanoparticles, but in many cases the shell with certain functional groups or certain protective groups. So these kind of core shell nanoparticles, certain composites are made, like where nano materials or nanoparticles are incorporated into polymer matrix and created thin films and all. Metal nanoparticles incorporated on carbon nanostructure is also a kind of very widely practiced nanostructure of metal nanoparticles, and thin films also. So there are very nanometer size thin films of these metal nanoparticles created for various applications, particularly electronic applications. So these are the possible nanostructures of metal nanoparticles. These are the same nanostructures possible for alloys also. If we can start from say alloy, and we are making by top-down approach. So this is one example where they have compared top-down and bottom-up approaches to create a bismuth suspension. One more thing I wanted to add, like all these possible nanostructures, when we see with naked eye, like this, and the nanoparticles in dye form look like a powder only. If you touch it, then they will be very fine, like they will, and we should not touch it with bare hands because they can penetrate through our skin also. So but they are very tiny, like if they are spread in a very small concentration into any liquid, they are suspended, you won't see even them inside, like it will be seen as a clear solution. So many times people mistake it as a solution, but nanoparticles never form solution, they form suspension. So and it even though it is clear, when you put it in the right instrument or appropriate technique, it can differentiate by scattering and diffraction and all. You can see the particle. So with naked eye you don't see particle. That doesn't mean it got dissolved into a certain liquid, but it got suspended, and since it was in a nano size, you cannot see it with your naked eye. And so all these, like nano wires, nano rods, nano crystals, when they are in their dry form, powder form, they look like similar. You cannot tell it is spherical nanoparticle or rod or wire or whatever when they are in a vial or something, in a bottle or in your sample vial. But when it is put into a proper technique, there you can see, in imaging technique, you can actually see what is there. And then there are other techniques also which are not imaging, but then still it will tell what type of material is there, whether it is rod, it is wire, it is mesh, it is particle. So all those things are normally people think everything is nanoparticle and they get dissolved into solutions. They don't get dissolved. If you dissolve it, then it becomes a kind of molecular solution. Like suppose I am putting silver in nitric acid, then it will get dissolved, silver nanoparticle, but it will become silver nitrate again. Then it is no use. So those type of misconceptions need not be there. This example, what we were talking about, it was in Nano Letters paper from Wang group. In 2004, what they were trying to compare top-down and bottom-up approaches for synthesis of bismuth nanoparticle. And they used a kind of bulk micron size bismuth suspension, and then they created bismuth nano powder out of it by emulsion technique, and they dissolved it at a very high temperature to smaller particles. So large particle getting dissolved and slowly small particles remain. So that is top-down approach, that right. And in bottom-up approach, they started with a kind of bismuth acetate in ethylene glycol as a suspension. As a solution, and then they do the flame pyrolysis to create a bismuth nano powder. So those type of techniques are already being used. This is another paper in Materials Today in 2004, where they have used gold nanoparticles on a layer by layer assembly they have created on a glass substrate. And then they have used cationic polyelectrolyte, because this each gold particle acts as an electrode. Then they have provided a kind of electrolyte also in between. And these gold nanoparticles are coated with silica, SiO2. actually not only gold nanoparticles, but they are actually a core shell gold nanoparticles. In that, core is gold and shell is silica, and shell thickness they have varied, and as shell thickness varies, you see the change in color of the substrate. Means when you see from the top as transmitted, and when you see from reflected from the bottom, so you put a light from the bottom and then reflected light or transmitted light, if you see, then you can see the difference in the color or their optical output, and those can be used for various things like display devices, the kind of sensors, color, optical sensors, all those things. So these things are already done in terms of R&D to control the size. This is another example, a very good example, and a very recent one. In Journal of Material Chemistry, one group has reported kind of flexible on a flexible plastic sheet, silver nano wires. So what rod type you are seeing is they are silver nano wires. They were coated on this PET and EVA is one of the conductive polymer sheet, and then on that they have put the nano. On that they have put the nano wires of silver, and upon that they have put a graphene sheets. It is coated with graphene sheet. So it is a kind of flexible transparent conductive plastic, and this can be used for like flexible display. Now you are already seeing that Galaxy Fold, Z Fold and all. So they are having this kind of flexible transparent conductive plastic displays, and they can be they can be capacitive, and they can be used for a kind of capacitance, resistance, and touch screen and all those kind of applications. So these are the things which are already happening with metal nanoparticles. And then there are some other nanomaterials are also used, such as graphene and all. This is the example which I was telling about, that they have created nano mesh, one Japanese group. What they have done is like they took a aluminum sheet and then they created a nano size holes inside it, and to create that they have done a kind of used masking, and then they used silica kind of nano dots on it, and then they did etching with that one, and only the silica nano dot area got etched, and where they have made holes. So this become a kind of a tiny thin aluminum sheet has become a kind of nano mesh. So why it is called nano mesh? Because these holes are with at a uniform interval on the whole sheet so nicely that it looks practically transparent, but actually it is not transparent. It is like we are seeing through some mesh from our window, like our net on the window. You can see outside even though there is a mesh in between you and the outside vision. So similarly so they can act as a kind of a conductive electrode material, as well as they are transparent enough. So with compared to other conductive substrate materials such as indium tin oxide and all, these have lower resistivity and better electrical conductivity. So they can be a better electrodes. They can give better performance in terms of electrical current transportation and all. So that is why they have created this one. This is also a very good example of nano patterning. Basically, in this case, material is not nano, it is a bulk material, but the patterning they have done at a very nano scale, and they have created a kind of nano mesh. So this is very unique example compared to, so what we were talking about, the advances in or recent advances in this thing. This is a kind of very good approach, very uncommon approach to the nano material or nano technology. Another thing is, like we were talking about metal nano alloys. Normally, metal nano alloys are not very commonly made, because they have a kind of challenge in terms of making alloy. Suppose I am making, say, I have made a gold and copper alloy in a bulk form, and I am trying to make its a nanoparticle. I have only one approach available, that is top down, because from bottom up, if I will start from the precursor of both, like say silver nitrate and gold chloride or orium chloride, what will happen is uh, when I create a nanoparticle by reduction, they will be a separated nanoparticle. They will not kind of amalgamated or kind of combined the way alloys are there, because when alloys are made, they are made at very high temperature. Gold and copper or gold and silver are so nicely uh, uh, packed. They are like, they look like a single entity. So when you create nanoparticles, they may not individual nanoparticles will not stay in that way. So they may not behave as an alloy. So what they have done, a laser ablation technique on a gold copper microparticle they have used, and on that they have done laser ablation. So microparticles were of around 1.5 micron range, and in solution they have done this laser ablation with stirring, and they could achieve the gold copper nanoparticles with around 2 to 50 nanometer size using laser ablation. So laser ablation is basically a top down approach where you can start with a bulk material and go to nano, and this is a very good example, and this was an Indian group. They have published in 2004 with this laser ablation. So in Tech Open, there is a group called for an open access journal. They have summarized all the metal nanoparticle synthesis techniques. In that, they have quoted their reference for laser ablation application. So laser ablation is one of the very powerful technique to create metal nanoparticles as well as metal nano alloys. There is another approach for creating metal nano alloys, that is called galvanic exchange. So we know that galvanization happens and with electrochemical process and all. So with their native redox properties between the and the difference of redox potential, galvanic exchange reactions take place between metal particles or metals. And so when what they have done is they created a kind of cluster of silver nanoparticles, a stable cluster, not the one which is getting aggregated and ripening to the larger particles, but stable nano clusters of silver nanoparticles they have created. In that, they have put a precursor of palladium. So what happened, like some of the palladium 2 plus converted into palladium 0 by oxidizing silver 0 to silver plus. So silver got oxidized and palladium got reduced. So silver act as an kind of a reducing agent, and palladium got reduced. So, and those reduced palladium particles got into by galvanic exchange got into that silver cluster. So it became a kind of silver palladium nanoparticle cluster. And so this became a kind of alloy, because it was initially only silver cluster, then it became a silver palladium nano cluster. So this was the kind of alloy. Again, they put a gold precursor, and same gold has also got reduced to gold 0 or orium 0, and silver got replaced after oxidation. So again, what cluster they ended up was containing gold, silver and palladium nanoparticle, and this they use for various applications. One of the application was catalytic applications. Then they created kind of aerogels out of it, by self-assembled oxidation induced aerogels they have created, and those aerogels were used for catalytic applications compared with the native galvanic exchanged nanoalloy. So those type of study they have carried out, and this is very recent work in 2017. Another work is what they have done. They have compared gold and silver bimetallic or kind of alloy nanoparticle versus core shell nanoparticle. In one case, the gold is core and silver is on a shell. And vice versa, and in another case both are mixed in different proportions, so they are essentially alloy, and in another case they are essentially a kind of core shell nanoparticles. So and then they compared size and other properties as well as size dependent optical properties. So we can see this this is also showing a very good result. So what happens is like we can create a bimetallic nanoparticle also, core shell nanoparticle also, depending on your functionality or depending on your the application. We can tune then them as per our need. So now we move to general characterization tools, because we have talked a lot about making these materials and all, but how to character. Not all laboratories have all the tools, but some of the tools are very common in nanomaterial characterization. The same tools are used for nanoparticles also, metal and alloy nanoparticles also. Mostly spectroscopic methods are like UVVs. We were talking about all these optical properties. They are measured by UVVs, and most of these are the size dependent properties. So as soon as you get a signature UV or visible or near IR band in this spectroscopy, you get the idea about your material getting converted into nano size. And then there are other techniques to measure size specifically, but UVVs is also a very good tool, very handy tool to check the nanoparticle synthesis as well as their optical outputs or optical applications. Another is fluorescence or emission. Then FTIR. FTIR is very good in terms of finding out the metal capped with different types of materials, like bare metal compared to the capped nanoparticles. You can identify easily using FTIR, and those capping materials can be identified. Any chemistry or anything done on those capping materials, like you are attaching certain kind of probe molecules, all those things, they can be also checked with FTIR. So it is also a very good technique, a very basic yet affordable and very good technique to check metal nanoparticles chemistry, some of the chemistries. And another is XPS. It is also a spectroscopy based technique. It is called X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. In some of the people called it ESCA also. That is it bombards electrons on your on your target material, whether it is nanoparticle, nanofilm, or whatever. And then whatever is the bombarded electrons coming out, based on their energy, in binding energy, they will find out what are the elements are in your composition. So different elements will have different binding energy. I mean, when the electrons, when heat them and coming out, they will have a different binding energy carrying. So they will show you a kind of, it is a kind of elemental analysis of nanomaterials by using XPS technique. You can see what is there. Silver is there. Silver is complexed with certain ligand, or it is a bare silver, it is core shell. All those things we can find out. So those things are really very very good with XPS. Another technique is XRF. XPS is little bit destructive technique. It in the end samples may not remain in the same form as before, but XRF is relatively less destructive, or almost significantly less destructive. That is X-ray fluorescence technology. It is only a surface technique, while XPS goes beyond surface. It can penetrate inside the material as high as 10 nanometer or even higher. So then it destroys the surface of the material, while XRF is a much less harsher technique compared to XPS, but it also gives a fluorescence, and from the fluorescence, not very empirically, but you can get idea about different components on the surface, like what are the metals there, what are the organic matter is there, all those things. Another set of technique is called imaging methods. These are very widely used, and people love this because they can see, like human curiosity is like that. When they can, unless they can see nanomaterials or nanoparticles, nanorods, nanowires, whatever, they will not believe. Like suppose one of my students, if they create a silver nanoparticle and the solution color will come, I will be sure it is there. But unless we do same, he or she will not be satisfied that they have created the nanoparticle. So SAM, scanning electron microscopy, is one of the most widely used technique to characterize nanoparticles, and particularly nowadays the FESEM and the SAM techniques coupled with EDEX are very powerful tools to find out the size of nanomaterials, their interaction with core and shell and other metallic or non-metallic components, as well as EDEX will tell you the composition also. And many times it is still on the basis on surface, but for nanomaterials, normally surface based EDEX and total ICP based elemental analysis more or less are very close, because if you are really dwelling in the ranges of below 10 nanometer, scanning electron microscopy, EDEX based composition analysis and ICP may match. So SAM is very important and very powerful technique nowadays. Another is equally powerful and even more powerful technique is TAM. It can give even angstrom size resolution. It gives electronic distribution among the nanomaterials, nanofilms. So transmission electron microscopy is also very powerful too. Another is SPM based methods. One is scanning tunneling microscopy, which is for conductive substrates. Basically, in our case, metal nanoparticles, alloys, all are conductive. Even their thin films are conductive. So STM is very powerful technique. At the same time, AFM also can be used. AFM normally gives idea about their morphology, their thickness from the substrate, their roughness, surface roughness, all those things can be known by STM and AFM. STM also gives idea about conductivity and all those things from tunneling current measurement and all. And another technique is confocal microscopy, which is mainly used for biological samples, but in cases where metal biological sample interaction is taking place. So suppose certain type of, say, gold nanoparticle loaded with certain type of enzyme or protein or something. Gold nanoparticle is a carrier, but on their surface something is attached and entered into, say, our cells or live cells or kind of experimental, in vivo experimental cells. Confocal microscopy can be used to detect them, and it can detect their accumulation, where they are targeting, what is happening in cell, what is happening with your probe molecule, whether in the targeted biomolecule is binding with that or not, all those things kind of thing. So confocal microscopy is also very useful and powerful technique nowadays. Another set of technique is called diffraction or scattering based method. These are also very widely used. DLS is a dynamic light scattering. It uses lasers. A particular wavelength lasers are irradiated on your suspension of nanomaterial. It acts on both, like nano suspensions, liquid suspensions, as well as aerosols. So aerosols are created out of nano powders in their chamber, and then laser is irradiated and the diffracted laser rays are measured, and then from the angle of diffraction as well as the coupling it with the model of Brownian motion of these nanomaterials in those controlled chamber environments, or in case of liquid, you need to know about their viscosity and all. And on that basis, they will calculate the movement of the nanomaterial, and then they will measure even zeta potential or a kind of surface potential of nanomaterial also when the bias is applied on the liquid cells. So this is very useful and powerful technique. But when the sizes are measured through DLS for a particular nanoparticle, say silver nanoparticle, I am preparing using PVP as a kind of capping agent. So when I measure with SAM the size, and when I measure size with DLS, there could be difference, because in SAM you are measuring essentially dry nanoparticle on the substrate of the SAM grid. But in case of DLS, you are using or measuring it in a solution. So essentially, what sizes you are going to get, they are actually hydrodynamic volume or hydrodynamic radius of your nanoparticle or diameter of your nanoparticle you are getting through DLS. And it could be different. Like sometimes DLS sizes are always on a higher side compared to SAM sizes, and that is why also many times for absolute sense people tend to ask for SAM data compared to DLS. But in real time or real life application, like for drug and other applications or drug delivery and all, DLS is much more practical, because actually you are going to use most of the nanoparticles in suspension form. So wherever nanoparticle is going to be used in suspension form, DLS is very good technique. Another technique, since we are talking about metal oxides and alloys, particularly XRD is also very good technique. It gives crystal information or crystallinity, non-crystallinity information also about nanomaterial, as well as crystal structure information. Another such technique is small angle X-ray scattering, which is also kind of very good for nanomaterials, particularly metallic and alloy based nanomaterials. Single crystal X-ray also, in some cases, it is being used to determine the particularly when there are nanocrystals of metal, and then their unit cell, crystal structure, all those things. If you want to know, then single crystal X-ray crystallography also should be done. And then there are certain destructive methods. One of the prominent one is ICP. ICP is inductively coupled plasma. It creates plasma out of your metal or whatever nanoparticle is there. It essentially digests it into strong acid. In most cases, it is nitric acid. In some cases, you can use aqua regia or even hydrofluoric acid. But most of the time, it is a concentrated nitric acid is used to digest the nanoparticles. So suppose you have say alloy or core shell or whatever type of nanoparticles, when you digest it, individual metal precursor components will get separated, and it will mineralize, means it will form their corresponding nitrates, and then they will be analyzed in ICP instrument for their concentration. Normally in ppm to ppb level you can go with ICP, and it is a very powerful technique in terms of finding. So suppose I am using say gold nanoparticle and I have a core of copper on it, or core of say I have a magnetic nanoparticle in the middle and I have a core of say gold on it, then I can find out that what are these two, what is in core, what is in shell. I mean total what is there, it will tell. That what is in core and what is in shell, it will not tell, because once you digest in acid, there will not be core or shell separately remain. Everything will be in the same vial or same test tube where you have digested, and then you submit it. So you know the total elemental analysis. Another technique is conventional elemental analysis, where the nanomaterials are combusted into corresponding vapors and then they analyzed. They are very high temperature techniques, but still you can get information about the particularly metals are not subjected to elemental analysis, CHNS, but the coatings on metals, say suppose I have silica coating or some polymer coating, or I have thiol based coating, so they can be analyzed, like what is the composition of that coating, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, oxygen ratio, respective ratio, and compared to the total bulk of the material, and then on that basis you can predict many things, presence of these elements, then their possible thickness, coupled with other techniques. So these are the normal characterization techniques. I have not gone very deep into all the characterization techniques with figures and explaining everything, because it itself takes a kind of whole lot of time. It could require another 1.5 hours to explain you all. But this is the crux of the matter, that these type of techniques can be used for characterization of general all nanomaterials. Particularly our interest now, or our focus now, is on metal nanoparticles and nanoalloys. So these some of the I have given two textbook references for the interested people to read. There is a series by Elsewhere, it is called Frontiers of Nanoscience. In that there are 3 volumes. The third volume is basically on metal nanoparticles and nanoalloys. It is edited by Johnston and Wilcoxon. You can you can get this book in some of your libraries, or you can try to find it on question about metal nanoparticle synthesis and nanoalloys synthesis, and you can get all the characterization techniques information also, how people, and then they have a more than 500 references for you to find out the other. Another book is Nanoalloys. It is called Nanoalloys: Synthesis, Structure and Properties. It was published by Springer in 2012 by group of editors, Damien and 2 more are there. This is also a very good book on nanoalloys and their applications and properties, particularly how they can be synthesized, their structural characterization and different properties. And these 2 can be of interest to the general audience in this webinar. Now I would like to end this one. Thank you all for listening very patiently, and now we can have question answers if time permits. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions that have come up.
Okay.
So, if you don't mind, we will quickly answer them, sir.
Yeah. Should I start? Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, we can begin. So first we have a question here from Dr. Shahira, and she would like to know whether these alloys were fabricated via chemically or biological synthesis.
Chemically or?
Biological synthesis.
Yeah, biological synthesis is also possible, but in most of the cases, biological materials, particularly microorganisms or even plant-based materials, they are a kind of chemicals only for metal precursor, because they act as a kind of reducing agent. So when you start with a precursor and reduce it with either a known chemical or a kind of plant extract or a microorganism, they are essentially get reduced to a zero valent metal center. So biologically also can be synthesized, and it falls under the category of chemical reduction based technique only.
Okay. And she also have a question whether after drying step these nanoparticle activities usually decrease. So she would like to know, like, what would be the reason for it?
Yeah, one of the prime reason is when you dry it, they get exposed to atmospheric oxygen. When they are in suspension state, they get exposed to oxygen, but only the dissolved oxygen, which would be very limited. So when they get exposed to atmospheric oxygen and they are not properly capped, they may get oxidized quickly on the surface, and then it gets passivated. So they will, particularly electronics applications may get hampered a lot, because oxides, or I mean metal oxides, are not very highly conductive in terms of electricity, while metals are. So when you are planning to use them as a kind of nano electrodes or something, their properties actually get deteriorated very quickly if you dry. So before drying, proper capping agent which doesn't compromise to the conductivity of material also should be kept in mind, but it should be used. There are many such available. There are certain polymers also, and their thickness is very less, like somewhere between 5 to 10 nanometer. So it will not affect overall optical properties of the nanoparticles. No, I mean, it's like it may affect, but not very highly. So they can be used. Capping agents are always best.
So I hope she has received the answer. Thank you, sir. And the next question is from Mr. Gabi Faith Abbas, and he would like to know what are the implications of using uncapped metal nanoparticles.
Yeah, these are the, I mean, in first question's answer, it is covered that if you use uncapped metal nanoparticles, the possibility of getting oxidized is there. So means there are two types of instability. One is chemical instability, that is, it is getting oxidized. Another instability is suspension stability, like because when it is in nano state, it is very tiny, it tends to get suspended into the liquid. But when it gets aggregate, single large micron size particle, which will then fall out of the suspension. So slowly you will not see any suspended nanoparticles. So when suspension is to be used for certain type of application, say for optical or anything, if it is uncapped, you will end up with not having any nanoparticles suspended after few hours of standing into them. And in some of the cases, atmospheric oxidation, light also, in some cases it affects, particularly in case of silver. Like there is a dissolved oxygen in the aqueous system, and you irradiate even sunlight, it will quickly get oxidized into Ag2O or AgO, and then it will dark gray nanoparticles or microparticles visibly you can see and falling out of the solution. So uncapped will have that problem of this thing. In some of the cases in our lab, what we have tried was we used capping agents which were both, like they were insulating also, and they had a little bit of antioxidant properties. So in those cases we got some good result, but in those cases we were planning to use it in a biological system or in kind of a drug delivery system. So there it was okay, but in some of the applications all capping agents are not going to work. So it depends. The choice of capping agent is also a very good area where a lot of research is happening nowadays.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And we have one more question from Dr. Shahira. In alloy fabrication, can we use different precursors at the same time, or should we use them separately?
Using different precursors same time will give mostly the chances of getting alloys are high compared to when you use separately. The chances of having pore shell type, or I mean one nano particle will be in a core and another will form a shell, those type of possibilities are very high. So most of the cases people use in the same time or simultaneously. But one example which I have shown by galvanic exchange reaction, you can use one by one precursor in this one, and then galvanic exchange takes place, and you end up with a kind of one or two or three component alloy nano alloy system. So those type of examples are there. It depends like what type of, because galvanic exchange reaction will not happen with all the types of metal. It depends. It depends on their redox chemistry or redox potential of those material in that particular medium. So gold, silver, platinum, these are good for galvanic exchange reactions. not all the metals.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir. And sir, can we use these alloy for agricultural application? Are they safe?
They are, yeah. There is a whole big topic of nanotoxicity. About a couple of years ago, there was a seminar organized by IIT Gandhinagar on nanotoxicity. An expert from USA had come. So nanotoxicity area of this nano whole nano science is still in nascent stage. Like, it is not very well studied. So yes, nanotoxicity effects must be kept into mind. Like those heavy metals which are actually toxic in the bulk form, they are going to be toxic in nano form also. Only thing is, like, most of the metals are highly toxic when they are in form of solution compared to they are in their metallic form. But there are certain exceptions also in those also, particularly lead, cadmium, mercury, all. But still, what happens is, like, for agricultural application, there is a field called micronutrients. There are certain metal elements are required by plants, particularly crops, as a nutrient, but they are micronutrients. They cannot be given in excess, because if they are given in excess, they will be accumulated in plant and give some kind of toxic effect. So micronutrients area, these nano alloys or core cell type metal nanoparticles are very good candidates. Only thing is that their concentration, their delivery rate by diffusion and all should be controlled, so that they don't they don't get mixed with water streams and all, and they stay to close in vicinity of the plants or crops, and then it is picked up by their roots and all, and become part of their life cycle. So that needs to be done. Like spraying like pesticide and all, it will definitely going to create a toxicity.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And over here we have a participant, Mr. Estebrati Abdullah, and he did using laser ablation for the synthesis NP, but he got difficult with the thickness. So is there any certainty about the amount liquid to metal particle that he has to depend upon? Like, what could be the reason about it?
Yeah, in that case, actually, maybe changing irradiation period or intensity of laser. And another thing is, yes, maybe precursors concentration can be applied a little bit. If they can reduce it, they can get in a similar time frame, they can get smaller size nanoparticles. But yes, that depends on, like, for a particular nano metal or nano alloy system, this needs to be optimized in a particular reaction condition by that group itself. Like, there is no general kind of this thing for general recipe for doing this. But like, suppose I am using with a particular this one, then I can play with the concentration, intensity of laser, irradiation duration, and all those to play with the size of the particle.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And we have our next question, which is like, what are the prospective areas in the future that nanostructured materials can be applied? That's the question.
Already what I showed that in 2000, what National Council of USA predicted, most of the area you are now seeing already the nanomaterials are being applied, but some of the areas where one of the limitations which nanomaterials are facing is their use in bulk, or their use like their cost is one of the very strong limiting factor. So I think 4 years back we were working on one oil recovery project, enhancing the oil recovery from the oil wells. I was working with ONGC. There they were interested in use of nanomaterials in drilling also. So drilling operation is a very bulky operation. It requires water and all the flooding chemicals in very large quantity, thousands of liters. In that, if you are going to use a nanomaterial, it is going to be very expensive, and then you are going to lose it also. You may not recover it back. So in those type of applications, so far nanomaterials are not widely used, but they are showing some good promise. Like they are showing improvement over conventional techniques and processes which are being used. But still, despite of that promise, you cannot use nanoparticles because cost and bulk production are limiting factors. So when nanomaterials being starts being produced in a very large quantity, or sufficient enough quantity to meet the cost and demand both, then they will become useful in most of the areas, including very bulky applications also. Some of the people are now using carbon nanomaterials in concrete and all those things. They are getting excellent properties, but putting carbon nanotube worth thousands of rupees into concrete is not going to be viable commercially. So those areas will see use of nanomaterials once we will have a techniques to produce nanomaterials in a very large scale at an affordable cost. So there, all these areas, composites, the electronic applications, are already nanomaterials are coming now. Nowadays, you are seeing that even those on our mobiles and tablets, they are coating nano glass or nano coated and all. So these are the coming. Then there are certain nanomaterials being coated on lenses and all to reduce the flare and abrasion and all. So these areas slowly will have. So I am expecting optics, electronics, health, agriculture, and energy storage and energy generation. There you will see lot of use of nanomaterials.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And we'll move on to our last question. That's from Mr. Wali Ali. And he would like to know plant or bacterial biosynthesis, which is the best for nanoparticles biosynthesis.
Yes, plants and bacterial or microorganism are very good candidates because many of the, good thing about them is they are very benign. They can be discarded. They are not very harsh chemicals going to affect the environment in an adverse manner like the other chemicals may do. But at the same time, in some of the cases they are not very highly effective. Like in some cases, if you are using chemical reducing agent, your conversion rate or yield will be much higher than the plant based or microorganism based, because these are not pure materials. Like I am extracting say something from out of leaf, it will be containing alkaloids, pigments, flavons, even terpenoids, all those things, and plant based certain oils and other things. So some of them are of the total composition, only few components might have a kind of antioxidant properties which will act in reducing the nanoparticles, but not all. So in those cases, they are not very highly efficient, and that is why many times people, what they are doing now, they are doing is they are using say citrate and ascorbates and all. They are derived from plants, but they are in a pure form they are using. So they are a very good reducing agent, and they will not have interference of multiple chemicals at the same in the same process. So less complexity will be there.
So thank you so much, sir, for answering to all our questions. Thank you so much, and thank you for the amazing informative lecture that you have given us today. So thank you to all the attendees who have joined us today, and thank you to Dr. Atindra Shukla again for giving us the recent developments in nanostructured metals and alloys. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can watch Sir's sessions. We'll be telecasting it on our YouTube channel of IFERP as well. If you have missed this session, you can watch them again. And if you have any questions, do write to us at webinar@iferp.in. And for more of our events and international conferences, follow us on IFERP Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram pages. So thank you so much, sir, once again, and thank you to all the attendees who have joined us today. Thank you, and have a nice
I would
day.
also
Yeah.
like to thank all the participants. I did not know the total number, but all the participants, and also special thank to you, Jazila, and Abhijit and team of IFERP. This is an excellent initiative, and in this challenging period of COVID and all, this activity is going to definitely bring researchers closer, and this is a very welcome initiative taken by IFERP. The series of webinars I have seen, the upcomings are also very interesting webinars, particularly in area of science, technology, and engineering, of developing or emerging areas. So I would like to thank IFERP platform as a whole, and the individuals who are doing this activity, excellent activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words, and thank you to all, and thank you, and have a nice day. Thank you.